previous episode, we took a look at the ARMS mobile report writer, looking at adding in incidents and names. In this episode, we're going to continue to work our way through some of the extra modules that we can put in information to so that we can meet the requirements and move forward with our case report. And here we are. So we left off on names just on the previous video. So now let's go ahead and move over to our next red dot. Our next red dot we have here is property. So for property, I need to put in something because if you remember, I put in a larceny code underneath my incidents here. So if I go into property, I now have an add property button up here at the top. I can click on add property. Now once again, we're going to do a search prior to adding in new. So we're going to search first, and if we find what we need there, we can reuse that piece of property. Otherwise, we can go ahead and just hit add new down at the bottom. So when you're adding in a piece of property, this is another one of those screens that will update depending on what type of entry you're making. So as I fill this out, you'll notice the fields down here at the bottom are going to be changing. So for example, in property category, if I put in evidence and drugs, narcotics, if I look down below, I've got things like NIBRS type property loss automatically set to seized. I've got NIBRS drug measurement type, suspected drug type, value, quantity. All of these are specific fields that are related to evidence, drugs, narcotics. Now, if I make a change here, if I change this from evidence, drugs, narcotics to, let's say, evidence, firearms, notice my NIBRS drugs fields go away, and now I have fields that would apply, like serial number. I can go to my new NCIC tab here and put in caliber, put in weapon type, weapon color, all of that fun information. So depending on what type of property you're putting in, you want to make sure you make the correct selections up at the top, because that will help you fill out the bottom by, one, pre-filling some of this information for you, and two, will make sure you don't have to look through all the different fields that are available for property and instead just focus on the ones that apply to you. So for my example here, I'm going to say I had some stolen property. I had stolen property and somebody stole some clothing from me. So when I change it, notice it's still pre-filling some of our fields for us. Requirement-wise, I just need to get my date entered, which is pre-filled for me automatically. And then down here at the bottom, I need to make sure I put in a description. So if I said this was a red shirt, for a very basic description here. So I've got my red shirt entered in here. So with that, I've met my minimum data needs for this piece of property. I've got my category, property type, date entered, and then down at the bottom I have my description. So I can continue to add to this though. So if you notice through the fields, I could put in quantity, I could put in recovery dates, the locations. At the very top, I can also connect the property to a person. So if I want to connect it to John Smith, our victim we put in on the previous video, then I can connect John Smith's profile to this piece of property so that I can return the property to the owner once we make the recovery later. Now we do have other tabs of information across the top here depending on what type of property you're working with. So I could put in a set of bicycle info if I was putting in a bicycle into stolen property, for example. Or I could upload photos into my piece of property as well. And then I also have media too. So media would allow me to put in any videos or PDFs or Word documents. Good for storage of sign-offs or returning to owner, things like that. So we have all these different options of information to put in, but our main goal has already been met. We have our category, we have our type, we have our date entered, and then down at the bottom we have our description. So once I hit save, that has now added a piece of property to my case report and gotten rid of my red dot next to property. Our next item here is vehicles. Now mine actually came with a vehicle because I issued this case report off of a vehicle stop. But if I needed to, I could remove this vehicle from the case or add a new vehicle. When you add a vehicle, you do have some pretty basic fields that are required. Of course, once again, we want to search first before we add in a brand new vehicle. But if I try to add in a vehicle without any information, you'll notice it'll yell at me and make sure I put in the required information for a vehicle before I can move forward. Now, my last required field on my case report here is my narrative. So my narrative is just looking to see if there's text in the case narrative function here. So for my example here, if I typed in something like narrative, Once I do that, you'll notice that my red dot goes away, and you'll also notice over here we're constantly saving. And this applies to everywhere in mobile. So if I'm adding in an incident code, if I'm adding in a name, if I'm typing on a narrative, as I type, everything is auto-saving automatically. So I don't have to worry as much about a battery dying on my laptop or phone dying or losing a phone or losing a tablet, breaking a tablet, whatever the case may be there. I don't have to worry as much about that because I'm constantly saving as I'm adding in data. So I don't have to get to page 100 of my War and Peace narrative and all of a sudden losing a cell signal or something means that I lost hours worth of work. It's all being saved automatically as we're entering in the information. Now, one other thing to point out about the narrative and other text fields in the browser is that if you're using something like Chrome or Firefox or Safari, a lot of these have built-in spell checks built into them. So if I start to type out something like narrative here and I add in some extra letters at the end, I can then right-click and it's going to suggest to me what I need to change my word to. So I could go to narrative, right-click that, click narrative, and then that'll let me put in the correct spelling of narrative. You'll notice you have all the kind of normal spell checking ability that you've probably seen if you've used Chrome for Facebook or anything else like that. So once I have information in here, though, I've met my minimum need. I no longer have a red dot next to narrative, nor do I have a red dot anywhere next to anything on my case report screen. So with that, I have met my minimum data needs on my case report. Now, in the next video, we're going to take a look at some of these extra things down here at the bottom. But before we finish this one, I want to make sure we talk about how do we submit this for approval. So I've met my minimum needs. What do I do to actually get this case report submitted for approval? Well, first thing I would do is I would come up here to approval records. Usually when you were clicking this before, remember we got a big red error message on the screen that would tell us what we were missing to be able to move forward. Now I can click on approval records, and that will load my case approval screen. So from this, I can actually pick what I want to do with this case report and who I want to submit it to. So in my case here, I'm going to mark submit for approval. Notice it automatically puts in the action date here as well. So I can pick who I want to submit this case report to. So if I said, for example, Josh Downs, that means what will happen now is if I hit send, he will receive a message within ARMS if he's logged in and an email to let him know, hey, Jason Wirth has submitted case number 190029 for your approval. Now, if Josh reviews that case report and he determines that that case report is good, he can approve it, and on it goes. We'll take a look at approving in a second here as well. But the other side of this would be, what if Josh doesn't like the case report? What if there's something missing? What if there's something we need to add? He'll then be able to kick back that case report. When he kicks it back, he'll have a different option up here at the top. Rather than submitting for approval, he'll have the ability to choose between kickback and approve. So he would select kickback, and then hopefully he would put in some notes in the bottom to let me know what I need to do. So in my case here, if I just put in some notes, and then if Josh hits send, then I would receive an email back saying Joshua Downs has kicked back case report 190029 with notes this case report could be better. Now, I could add in some other things to this. So for example, down here, I could begin to CC other people in on this. So if I wanted to CC in Michael Bryant, I could put in his name here. And now when I hit send, it would send an email to both Joshua Downs and Michael Bryant with the note this case report could be better to let them know Jason Wirth is now submitting this case report for approval. You could CC single people. You can also CC whole groups of people. So if your administrator has organized your employees into groups, divisions, whatever you want to call them, I could select a division here. So for example, my patrol users, and now everybody listed here would receive an email. Joshua Downs, Michael Bryant, and everybody in the patrol division would receive an email saying Jason Wirth is submitting case report 190029 for approval. But with that, we have met our minimum needs of our case report and submitted it for approval. In our next video, what we're going to take a look at are some of the extra abilities on the case management side. What extra things can we add to a case report if needed? And if you are an officer that's in charge of case approval process, how are you going to manage your case log and what cases you need to be focusing on as well? Thank you.